Forget what you think you know about Yennefer of Vingerberg. Yes, she's the raven-haired sorceress with a stare sharp enough to cut steel and a wit even sharper. She's powerful, seductive, terrifying, and brilliant all at once. But to reduce her to the tired caricature of the dangerous sorceress is to completely miss the point of her character. Yennefer is not simply a bundle of fireballs and cutting remarks. She's a woman forged by pain, tempered by ambition, and forever struggling between what she desires and what she is willing to sacrifice to achieve it. And oh, does she sacrifice? Let's roll back the clock to the girl who wasn't Yennefer yet. Born with a crooked spine, deformed, and subjected to the cruelty of both her peers and her family, young Yen was the textbook example of society's discard pile. In Sapkowski's novels, her own father abandons her and blames her mother for birthing a useless hunchback. Imagine starting life not just at rock bottom, but several layers below. The fire that later burns in Yennefer's eyes began as a spark of pure survival. It's important to keep this origin in mind because everything about her later obsession with beauty, status, and power is rooted in this primal truth. She refused to remain powerless ever again. Cue Tisaya de Vries, the formidable headmistress of Aretuza, who spots Yennefer's latent magical talent. But here's the thing about Aretuza. It's less warm Hogwarts and more cutthroat finishing school for political weapons. The training isn't just about harnessing chaos. It's about discipline, control, and, let's be honest, survival of the fittest. Yennefer doesn't just claw her way up. She claws, burns, manipulates, and shatters her way up. In her transformation scene, where her deformities are corrected in an agonizing magical surgery, the cost is staggering. She forfeits her ability to have children, a trait that becomes the defining wound of her entire existence. This is where the first layers of her complexity start to shine. Yennefer gains the beauty and power she craved, but she immediately discovers that ambition is a hollow meal without the possibility of legacy, without love, without the one thing she can't command into existence. It's an almost Faustian bargain like Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, who trades his soul for power but spends his vital hours in agony at what he's lost. Yennefer makes her pact early and spends the rest of her life wrestling with the void it leaves. Now, if we fast forward to her encounters with Geralt of Rivia, things get even more layered. Their relationship has been called many things: toxic, fated, passionate, doomed, magnetic. The truth is, it's all of those and none of them. Geralt and Yennefer are two broken people trying to build a house out of the fragments of their past traumas. And surprise, it doesn't always hold together. Their love is forged by chaos itself, literally, thanks to that pesky djinn, but it's also deeply human. Geralt sees through Yennefer's sharp edges, recognizing the vulnerable woman beneath. And Yennefer, in turn, finds in Geralt the first person who refuses to reduce her to just her power or her beauty. But here's where it gets interesting: Yennefer's pursuit of motherhood. She spends much of her arc searching for a way to undo her infertility, a quest that takes her through dangerous rituals, shady bargains, and moral compromises that would make even Stregobor blush. Is this selfishness? Is it vanity? Or is it, as Simone de Beauvoir might argue, an expression of her deep existential yearning to transcend her fate, to create, to define herself on her own terms rather than those imposed on her? The tragedy, of course, is that fate has a different plan. Enter Ciri, the child of destiny. Yennefer's relationship with Ciri is where her arc truly blossoms beyond the archetype of the ambitious sorceress. She doesn't just mentor Ciri, she loves her, protects her, and eventually sees her as the daughter she could never have. This is where the ambiguity of Yennefer's earlier choices comes full circle. The woman who once sought a child to fill her own void becomes the selfless mother figure to the girl who could very well reshape the world. That's not selfishness. It's redemption, or at least as close as Yennefer ever gets to it. And let's not overlook her politics. Yennefer plays the Game of Thrones long before Ciri enters the picture. She sits on councils, plots alliances, and maneuvers through the halls of power like a grandmaster. But unlike Geralt, who endlessly insists on neutrality, Yennefer recognizes that neutrality is just another word for abdication. In a world where kingdoms rise and fall, where sorcerers backstab each other in the name of progress, And where innocent people are trampled under the boots of armies, Yennefer refuses to stand aside. She might manipulate, she might deceive, she might even betray, but she does so with the conviction that her actions matter. Compare her to Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, and you'll find startling similarities. Machiavelli argued that a ruler must sometimes act against virtue to preserve the state. Yennefer, too, acts against virtue to preserve herself, her loved ones, or her vision of the future. The best part? She owns it. Yennefer doesn't apologize for her choices. She doesn't cry out for sympathy or beg for forgiveness. She wears her sins like a well-tailored cloak, daring you to judge her. And that, ironically, is why she remains one of the most compelling figures in The Witcher. She is not here to be liked. She is here to be understood. And once you peel back the layers, the bitter irony is that she is perhaps the most human character in the saga. Because at the end of the day, Yennefer is not about perfection. She's about struggle. She's about the messiness of ambition, love, loss, and redemption. She's the sorceress who wants it all and hates herself for wanting it. She's the woman who fights tooth and nail to control destiny but learns, painfully, that destiny has a way of slipping through your fingers. And maybe that's why we keep coming back to her. Not because she's flawless, but because she's painfully, beautifully flawed. So, the next time someone tries to dismiss Yennefer as just that witch who made Geralt miserable, remind them of this: she's not just part of the story, she is the story. Her ambition sets events in motion, her sacrifices shape the lives of those around her, and her love, as conflicted as it is, becomes the very heart of The Witcher. To understand Yennefer's rise, we need to return to the moment where her life first veered away from despair and into legend, Aretuza. Before that, Yennefer's world was a bleak script of cruelty. Her father's rejection, her deformity, the constant reminder that she was somehow less than. These were the shadows that framed her earliest years. And yet, as countless philosophers have suggested, suffering often forges the sharpest steel. Nietzsche, ever fond of paradox, claimed that what does not kill us makes us stronger. In Yennefer's case, every insult, every rejection became tinder for the fire of her desire. When Tissaia de Vries purchased Yennefer for a handful of coins and whisked her to Aretuza, it was not a rescue in the conventional sense. It was more akin to initiation, an entry into a crucible where only the ruthless survived. Aretuza was not a sanctuary, it was a proving ground. Magic there was not merely about channeling chaos, it was about weaponizing discipline. Think of Plato's allegory of the cave. The girls of Aretuza were dragged from the shadows of ignorance, often violently, into a harsh, blinding light. Some resisted, some perished, and some, like Yennefer, embraced it with both defiance and hunger. Her transformation is often described in physical terms. The brutal magical surgery that straightened her spine, refined her beauty, and rendered her barren. But to frame it purely as cosmetic is to miss the deeper truth. That night, Yennefer wasn't simply sculpted into a figure of breathtaking allure, she was reforged into an entirely new self. It was a ritual of death and rebirth. In sacrificing her fertility, she cast off her past identity as the hunchback piglet and stepped into the persona of Yennefer of Vengerberg, a name soon to command awe and fear in equal measure. Here's the tragedy, though. The very thing that gave her the power to ascend also sowed the seeds of her deepest longing. By losing the possibility of motherhood, she was chained to a perpetual void. A void she would try again and again to fill with political maneuvering, with ambition, with love, and eventually with Ciri. In this sense, Yennefer's story echoes the myth of Icarus. He achieves flight, but at the cost of hubris, his wings doomed to melt. Yennefer achieves beauty and power, but the wax holding her wings together is the absence of choice, the knowledge that she was never asked whether the price was worth it. The early sacrifices at Aretuza, her fertility, her innocence, her former self, were not the end, but the beginning. They were the down payment for her climb up the perilous ladder of mage politics. Every lesson she endured, every small concession she made to authority or vanity hardened her resolve. As Machiavelli once observed in The Prince, fortune favors those bold enough to shape it with their own hands. Yennefer, even as an apprentice, was already crafting her fate. This is the true spark of desire, not simply wanting more, but being willing to bleed for it. And as we follow her journey beyond Aretuza, we'll see that this hunger, this relentless yearning, is both her greatest weapon and her most haunting curse. If Yennefer's transformation at Aretuza was the spark, then her subsequent choices were the wildfire. From the very beginning, her moral compass was not broken. It was simply calibrated differently. Where most are taught to navigate life through the poles of right and wrong, Yennefer's needle spun toward a singular magnetic north, power. And that is where the intrigue lies. Consider her career in the early years of her ascendance. Time and again, she was placed in situations where compassion might have softened her decisions. Yet, she rarely wavered from the path that secured her influence. Was this mere self-preservation? Perhaps, at first. After all, a woman who has clawed her way out of humiliation will do anything to ensure she never returns to the shadows. But, over time, survival bled seamlessly into ambition. She was no longer just warding off danger. She was constructing empires of influence, weaving herself into the very fabric of northern politics. Take, for instance, her relentless pursuit of fertility. On the surface, it seems almost tender. What could be more human than the desire to create life? And yet, when viewed through the wider lens, her quest becomes a case study in her ends justify the means philosophy. She sought fertility not by quiet resignation, but by hurling herself into dangerous experiments and bargaining with beings of immense power. It is reminiscent of Faust's bargain with Mephistopheles' power and desire entwined in a transaction that leaves one questioning where necessity ends and ambition begins. Was Yennefer's pursuit of motherhood truly about love? Or was it about reclaiming the one choice stripped from her, no matter the cost? Her political maneuvers follow a similar pattern. When she allied with kings, it wasn't out of loyalty, but out of calculated positioning. She understood, like Machiavelli's prince, that power is sustained not by goodwill, but by perception and fear. To her, morality was a costume worn when convenient, discarded when burdensome. This adaptability, though often condemned, was also the very thing that allowed her to survive in a world dominated by men and ruled by treachery. What makes Yennefer fascinating is not that she abandoned morality entirely, but that she redefined it. She carved her own spectrum of ethics, one in which ambition and survival were not sins but necessities. Her choices illuminate the messy truth that in the pursuit of greatness, purity often becomes collateral damage. As Hannah Arendt once argued in her analysis of power, the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. Yennefer did make up her mind, but her definition of good was tethered to her own assent. So when we examine her most controversial decisions, whether in love, politics, or magic, we are left with a portrait not of a villain nor a hero, but of a woman who dared to prioritize agency above all else. And that, perhaps, is the truest kind of moral rebellion. When Yennefer of Vengerberg walked out of Aretuza reborn, she was not merely a sorceress, she was a declaration. The hunchbacked, half-forgotten girl had been transfigured into a vision of perfection. Yet as with every bargain in the Witcher's universe, the price was not simply cosmetic. It was existential. Yennefer's physical beauty came at the cost of her fertility, an ironic twist of fate that would haunt her like an unhealed wound. This was the first and most literal sacrifice, a severing of her capacity to shape life even as she mastered the power to destroy it. But Yennefer's sacrifices extend beyond the physical. Power, as Nietzsche reminds us, demands more than possession. It demands transformation of the self. To command, Yennefer sacrificed not only her body but also her emotional vulnerability. This does not mean she became heartless. Quite the opposite. Her tenderness, when it did surface, was volcanic, too dangerous, too consuming. To protect herself, she built walls of arrogance and wit, every sarcastic retort another brick in the fortress of her self-preservation. This armor allowed her to stride into courts of kings as an equal, but it also robbed her of intimacy. Geralt of Rivia, with all his gruff honesty, often found himself colliding with these walls. Their bond was forged in passion, yes, but also in perpetual friction. two stubborn souls who longed for each other yet were too proud to yield. In this, Yennefer's ambition was both a blessing and a curse. She carved a place for herself in a world designed to dismiss her, but that very act demanded sacrifices few could stomach. As the Roman historian Tacitus once wrote, "The desire for safety stands against every great and noble enterprise." Yennefer inverted this truth. She gave up safety entirely, gambling herself for greatness. Yet greatness seldom leaves room for gentleness. Her relationships inevitably bore the brunt of her relentless climb. Take her connection to Geralt. He was, in many ways, her equal mutated, othered, cursed with both power and loneliness. They were twin stars, drawn to each other by shared gravity, yet destined to burn each other with their proximity. Yennefer's hunger for control clashed with Geralt's attempts at stoic resignation. Their love was not the soft comfort of hearth and home, but a battlefield, where each victory of tenderness was matched by a retreat into pride. Their bond endured, but it endured like a scar endures, permanent, painful, a reminder of both wound and survival. And then came Ciri. If Geralt was Yennefer's mirror, Ciri was her revelation. Here was a child, a girl destined by prophecy, who slipped past Yennefer's walls with disarming ease. For the first time, Yennefer confronted the maternal instinct she had been denied. In teaching, guiding, and protecting Ciri, she glimpsed the life she had once believed was forever stolen from her. But this relationship, too, was marked by sacrifice. To love Ciri, Yennefer had to risk vulnerability, to expose herself to the very pain she had spent decades suppressing. And worse, her ambition sometimes blinded her to the consequences of her choices for the girl she came to love as a daughter. At moments, her pursuit of power and her desire to protect Ciri collided, creating rifts that were as painful as they were inevitable. The most devastating sacrifices, however, were not the visible ones, but the internal toll. To command is to stand apart, and Yennefer's life was a study in isolation. She played the part of the enchantress, the manipulator, the kingmaker, but when the courtly masks were stripped away, she was left alone with the echo of her past. Regret lingered like a ghost, the faces of those she had betrayed, the children she could never bear, the moments of tenderness lost to pride. Yennefer's brilliance was undeniable, but brilliance often casts a shadow. That shadow was loneliness. This paradox is what makes her compelling. Yennefer achieved what countless others could only dream of: power, respect, and near immortality. And yet, her victories were inseparable from her losses. She gained the world but sacrificed parts of herself that no magic could restore. In this, she embodies the tragic art familiar from classical literature. Think of Euripides' Medea, who wielded magic and cunning yet sacrificed her humanity to secure her autonomy. Or Shakespeare's Lady Macbeth, whose ambition demanded the loss of her sanity. Yennefer, too, carries the weight of ambition's toll, not through outright villainy, but through the quieter, more insidious erosion of the self. And yet, to frame her story purely in terms of loss is to miss the essence of her command. Yennefer's sacrifices were not simply tragic, they were chosen. She was never a victim passively swept up in fate. She was an active participant, a woman who looked destiny in the eye and bartered with it. That agency is both her triumph and her torment. By rejecting passivity, she embraced responsibility for her own suffering. As Jean-Paul Sartre argued, freedom is a burden as much as it is a gift, because every choice becomes a testament to who we are. Yennefer bore that burden without apology. What, then, is the cost of command? For Yennefer, it was the body that no longer obeyed her desires, the heart that armored itself against love, and the mind that could never escape the ghosts of ambition. It was the uneasy balance between bonds forged with Geralt and Ciri, and the rifts her ambition carved into those same relationships. It was the loneliness of power, the regret of missed tenderness, the ceaseless battle against the girl she once was and the woman she demanded to become. And yet, despite all of this, or perhaps because of it, we love her. We admire her because she refuses to be simple, because she embraces the contradictions of command. Yennefer is not a saint, nor is she a monster. She is a mosaic of sacrifice and triumph, an eternal reminder that greatness is never free. In her story, we see the messy truth of human ambition. To rise is to bleed. To love is to risk. and to command is to pay a cost that cannot be tallied until the end. For all her brilliance, Yennefer of Vengerberg embodies one of the oldest truths in both myth and history. The higher you climb, the more elusive the summit becomes. Her life is a study in paradox. She wielded chaos with elegance, bent kings to her counsel, and outlived generations. Yet the one thing she truly sought, fulfillment, always danced just beyond reach. Like Tantalus in Greek myth, cursed to thirst eternally as water receded from his lips, Yennefer's desires were both her fuel and her torment. At first, her pursuit was survival. A disfigured, despised girl with no prospects, she craved transformation. Aretuza gave her beauty, power, and a place in the world. But even as she conquered those early insecurities, another hunger emerged. No sooner had she gained acceptance than she set her sights on dominance. And once she grasped it, the desire shifted again. Fulfillment, for Yennefer, was always one step ahead. This is the paradox of power. The more one accumulates, the greater the void it leaves behind. Political influence gave her leverage, but it also chained her to courts and schemes that hollowed her spirit. Magical supremacy made her formidable, but it magnified her isolation. Her desperate pursuit of fertility is the most poignant example. To regain the ability to bear a child, she was willing to bargain with fate itself. Yet even this pursuit backfired, leading not to peace but to disillusionment. In chasing what was lost, she uncovered the harsh reality that some sacrifices, especially the ones freely chosen, are irrevocable. Philosophers across time have wrestled with this same paradox. As Seneca warned, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor. Yennefer's craving was not for coin or lands, but for wholeness. And yet, like Macbeth reaching for the crown, each triumph only revealed another peak. Her victories were never destinations, only way stations on an endless ascent. What makes her fascinating is that the cycle was self-perpetuating. Yennefer could not stop striving because ambition had become her identity. To stop was to face the void of her regrets, her loneliness, her unhealed scars. So she pressed forward, sometimes with brilliance, sometimes with recklessness. Every spell, every alliance, every betrayal was both a testament to her strength and a reminder of her fragility. In the end, Yennefer teaches us that the pursuit of power is not inherently wrong, but it is never enough. Power can command respect, alter kingdoms, and save lives, but it cannot erase the past, guarantee love, or heal the quiet ache of what might have been. Her story is the eternal reminder that the unattainable peak is not the mountain before us. It is the horizon within. When we arrive at the end of Yennefer of Vengerberg's long and winding arc, the question is unavoidable. Did her sacrifices lead to redemption, or was she ultimately a prisoner of her own choices? The answer, as with most things tied to Yennefer, is complex, tangled in paradox, and shimmering with contradiction. On the surface, her journey seems defined by ambition, every spell, every alliance, every betrayal, driven by the desire to transcend her past. But to reduce Yennefer to mere ambition would be to overlook the profound scars she carried, both visible and invisible. Her disfigured childhood shaped her longing for beauty. Her transformation at Aretuza gave her power, but robbed her of motherhood. Her political maneuvers brought her influence, yet cost her trust. Redemption, if we can call it that, was never a single act for Yennefer. It was a constant negotiation between who she was, who she wanted to be, and who the world demanded she become. In this, Yennefer resembles the tragic figures of classical literature. Like Medea, she wielded magic with devastating force, sometimes at terrible moral cost. Like Faust, she seemed willing to bargain with anything, time, body, or soul, in exchange for what she desired most. And like Achilles, her strength was both her salvation and her doom. Yet, unlike these figures, Yennefer's story resists a clean resolution. She is not condemned to eternal damnation like Faust, nor destroyed entirely by vengeance like Medea. Instead, her tale ends at a kind of uneasy equilibrium, where redemption lies not in undoing past sins, but in the love and loyalty she eventually embraced. Her impact on the world of The Witcher cannot be overstated. Without Yennefer, Geralt would have remained a lone wanderer, perhaps never softened by intimacy. Without Yennefer, Ciri might have been consumed by her own power, lacking the maternal guidance that shaped her resilience. In a way, Yennefer's greatest redemption is not found in her personal victories, but in the legacy she leaves through others. She became the axis upon which Geralt and Ciri's fates turned, forging bonds that outlasted kingdoms, wars, and even prophecies. Still, the question lingers: did she truly redeem herself? Cynics might argue she never escaped her selfishness. Even her protection of Ciri could be read as another bid to grasp what fate had denied her, the child she could never bear. But here is where Yennefer transcends mere archetype. Her love for Ciri grew into something beyond desire, beyond ambition. It was messy, imperfect, sometimes suffocating, but it was real. And that reality, in the brutal world Sapkowski created, may be redemption enough. We must also consider how her story reflects on us, the audience. Yennefer forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that power is never clean, that ambition is rarely pure, and that redemption is not about erasing mistakes, but about what you do after making them. She reminds us of Camus' notion of the absurd hero, struggling against a meaningless world, not in despair, but in defiance. If Geralt embodies stoic endurance, Yennefer embodies relentless striving, no matter the cost. As for her legacy, it is twofold. To the world of The Witcher, Yennefer is a figure of awe and fear, a sorceress whose decisions shaped destinies. To Geralt and Ciri, she is family, flawed yet irreplaceable. And to us, she is a mirror of ambition's paradox, inspiring in her audacity, cautionary in her sacrifices. So is Yennefer's tale a warning or an inspiration? The truth is, it is both. It warns of the hunger that can never be satisfied, the sacrifices that leave scars too deep to heal. But it also inspires through her refusal to be defined by those scars, her insistence on forging her own path even when the world sought to chain her. In the end, Yennefer's story does not resolve into a neat moral. Instead, it lingers, haunting, radiant, frustrating, and unforgettable. Perhaps that is the truest form of redemption, not to be perfect, not to erase the past, but to leave a legacy so indelible that the world cannot imagine itself without you. Yennefer of Vengerberg, flawed and fierce, did exactly that.